we've got a good finger pointing ministry going on. No, you are. Hey, they get a lot of attention at concerts. They're the ones up at the concerts, And yeah. All right, let's do this thing. All right, you want to check on the YouTube for me? All right, so we're going to continue on with the character study phase. This morning we got a couple more weeks of this. Going back, I was trying to figure out who I wanted to do this week. So I went back and I thought about who we've looked at, who we've talked about. We looked at Barzillai, and his great burden to leave his children with the king in the care of the king. We looked at Joseph, one of the greatest parallels types of Christ. The last time I was up here, I talked about Mephibosheth, showing us that even the most useless, undeserving servant can find themselves at the king's table. All you got to do is accept that invitation there. Hannah and her pursuit to bear fruit and give back to God. And then last week, Steve talked to us about Lot, looking at the story of, kind of having a hard time leaving the stuff, with, his wife looking back and all that. So I was thinking, we've looked at all these great character studies and all these good things that we can pull out of it and the parallels that we should place in our own life. And I was like, all right, well, I need to feel better about myself. So I'm going to pick a bad guy this week. And the only problem is that when you start looking into the bad guys, you see more of them in you than the good guys. So that one kind of backfired on me. But anyway, this week we're going to look at Pontius Pilate. So if you don't know, I think I'll get into who he is, but really just the approach here was, I think it's beneficial to learn just as much as what we don't want to be for the Lord and what we shouldn't do, what the Lord hates, as what the Lord loves and what he wants us to be like. I learned that in my professional field. You can take an internship and it's not lost time if you hate it. I think you can take that and associate it to the fact, okay, I figured out this is exactly what I don't want to do. So you're never going to waste your time, going in that direction again. So this week I put a note in here to pray. So I've got an introduction and then a prayer note. So no, that's a dig on myself because I usually kick it off with just praying right away. So trying to get better here. So let's pray, and then we'll look at Pilate. Dear God, thank you for bringing us here today. Thank you for this church and what it's meant to me in my life and what it's done for me, Lord. I just pray that it's a blessing to others this morning with what you put on my heart. I pray that you get me out of the way and just get across what you need to get across. It's been a blessing. And I thank you for the time that we have, that we can come here freely. I pray that you give Bob the words to say. It's a blessing to us as well. Just make room for it in our heart, that we share it with somebody else this week and apply it to our life, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so we're first introduced to Pontius Pilate in Matthew chapter 27. So each one of the Gospels, you got Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Each one of those stories details the life of Jesus. So the birth, death, burial, resurrection, all those different things. And Matthew chapter 27 describes the deliverance of Jesus over to the Jews for crucifixion. So how those days pan out there, if you're not familiar with it. Long story short, Judas Iscariot betrays Jesus. He delivers him over to the religious officials here, and that's how we meet Pontius Pilate. So I'm going to go through Matthew chapter 27 and kind of break up the verses in chunks, and we'll take kind of similar verses throughout the Gospels to tie back. Like I said, most of them, they're pretty similar. There's obviously different books. There's 4 of them, but they're detailing the same account. So we'll start with verses 1 and 2 in Matthew chapter 27. It says, "When the morning was come, all the chief priests and the elders of the people took counsel against Jesus to put him to death. And when they had bound him, they led him away and delivered him to Pontius Pilate, the governor." So there's our introduction to our character today. There's really not a whole lot on Pilate. Not that I found, at least. Last week with Mephibosheth, I looked up his name, I looked up his lineage, where he comes from, and where he lives, and all these different things. And I didn't really find much on Pilate. So Pilate is mentioned 56 times in the Bible in a matter of 54 verses, and all but four of those are in the Gospels here. So there's 3 references in Acts, and there's a reference in 1 Timothy, and even those references tie back to this story here of the part that he plays in the deliverance of Jesus over to basically his crucifixion. So taking out of that, the Bible is very siloed on what Pilate's part is that he plays in the history of our Bible, essentially. So, like I said, not really much on where he comes from what I found. probably successfully assume that he lives in Rome currently if he's the governor there. But going through Matthew chapter 27, we'll pick it back up in verse 11. Verse 3 through 10 details the account of Judas trying to take back the money to the leaders. He betrays Jesus. He's paid 30 pieces of silver, tries to take it back. Like we often do. We do something bad. We realize it was a mistake. We try to make it better. Sometimes you just can't. And, they're like, hey, we don't want that money. That's blood money. Like, you did your thing. We appreciate it, pal. We'll see you later. So, for Pilate's story, we'll pick it back up in verse 11. It says, And Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, saying, Art thou the king of the Jews? And Jesus said unto him, Thou sayest. And when he was accused of the chief priests and the elders, he answered nothing. Then said Pilate unto him, Hearest thou not how many things they witness against thee? And he answered him to never a word, insomuch that the governor marveled greatly. So Jesus is standing in front of Pilate at this time, being delivered by his own people for the judgment that they're bestowing upon him. And this is where a decision needs to be made. The main concept of what we're looking at and what I saw with Pilate this week is just the importance in our ability to make good decisions. What happens when we make good decisions? What happens when we make bad decisions? And what happens regardless of what that choice is? I believe Pilate was faced with a few different decisions throughout his mentions in the Bible, even though it's pretty limited. And I think that he was given more than enough opportunity to make the right decisions. You'll hear me say multiple times today that I'm thankful that I'm not in the position that he was. I don't want to stand up here and point fingers and say, great job, because I don't know what decisions I would have made. As we look at the position that he was in and the situation and the circumstances that surrounded it, I think Pilate has a pretty negative connotation behind his name because of what he is, because he delivered our Savior to his death on the cross. But I'm not vouching for him, but we'll see. It's not as easy, sitting here in the Lenexa Senior Center as it may be when we're reading at home, and as it was for him. So the first two verses here provided the first opportunity that I saw for Pilate to make a good decision, because maybe it's easy to gloss over, but I noticed that Jesus answered Pilate. That he didn't answer the others. It said that he didn't pay them any attention. And his answer to Pilate was short, Thou sayest. But he did acknowledge the question that Pilate asked him. He said, Art thou the king of the Jews? And he responds, Thou sayest. Like I said, you can maybe gloss over that. Maybe I'm digging into it too much. But I see he ignores these people and he answers Pilate. He's standing right in front of them. And he says, Well, you said it, not me. And, every word in the Bible is written and recorded for a reason. It's these patterns that we pick up on. It's these little chunks of information that really stick out and make you stop when you're reading. And that's how I learned to read the Bible. So that's what I try to do. Like I said, the answer is short and sweet. It's no monologue. But I believe that this is the first opportunity that Pilate had to say, okay, the King of the Jews has spoken. He says, Art thou the King of the Jews? Thou sayest. All right, you're right. But unfortunately, he doesn't, right? So the small speed bump in the story here could have changed everything. Our lives are literally one decision away from being completely different. We could leave the senior center today and drive across the country and never come back. I mean, there's literally nothing stopping you from doing that. I mean, you're not going to, I hope. I'm not doing that. But, our lives are so siloed. They're so routine to do the same thing over and over. And we'll see that those decisions stack up. And eventually that makes, our livelihood, that makes the people that we are. And that's the thing that we look at with Pilate today. These interactions are short. These decisions are quick. These verses they're not very long. But they stack up and they give us the story of the crucifixion here. So decision, make or break us. It's as a man and a woman, as an employee or an employer, as a Christian, I mean, your decisions are going to make or break you. And given the free will that we have, it's great. Obviously, we need to have free will, and it's a great thing that we can use. But it's a very dangerous tool in our own life. So the Bible, from cover to cover, is essentially just the story of God moving in one direction, the devil moving in opposition, and then these characters sprinkled in between that we see in our life, or that we place ourselves in their shoes and the decisions that they make and the circumstances that come out of it. Pilate is what I call a Bible could have been, right? And I know it's super original, but there's a lot of them. There's a lot of Bible could have beens. based on the decisions that they make, or that they would have made, or that they didn't make. And I think that it's unfortunate because Pilate had the opportunity to be a Bible great, a potential, maybe a different story that we read, maybe an entirely different book. I mean, who knows? I'm not going to stand up here and say that it would have been, but I'm sure that we'd be reading it differently if he would have made different decisions. And if someone were to look into our life and read our life story, how different would it be based on the decisions that we make? And I learned quickly when I got involved in a Bible-believing church, this is my next super original statement, but the best way to stop making bad decisions in your life is to start making good decisions. And it's, like I said, it's genius IQ on that one. But it really is, it's a practical application of just applying the Bible in your life and looking at things and saying, how do I get better? Well, it starts with your decision-making skills. And I had to do that in my own life. I looked around and I saw a lot of people that knew the Bible a lot better than I did. I saw kids getting up and doing devotions, and I was like, man, why can't I do that? Why can't I know my Bible? Why can't I open the Bible and understand what I'm reading? And then I had to think, okay, instead of watching SportsCenter, why don't you open the Bible? Why don't you read the Bible? Why don't you ask questions? Why don't you look at the books that you bought from the bookstore that are collecting dust on the nightstand? All these different things. And they lead to decisions that change, your outcome here. So we'll pick it back up in verses 15 through 18, setting the precedence here with our decision-making skills and how Pilate shows us pretty much how not to do this. We left off with Pilate marveling greatly at Jesus really not responding to anybody in the room outside of saying, "Thou sayest." In verse 15 through 18, it says, "Now at that feast the governor was wont to release unto the people a prisoner, whom they would. And they had then a notable prisoner called Barabbas. Therefore when they were gathered together, Pilate said unto them, Whom will ye that I release unto you, Barabbas or Jesus, which is called Christ? For he knew that for envy they had delivered him." So here's the next bad decision Pilate makes in the string of events. He turns the power of his authority over to the people to make the choice. He says in verse 17, "Whom will ye that I release unto you?" And, I read this and I can't help but think, does he really not know who they're going to choose? I mean, to me, that's kind of setting himself up for the answer that he knows is coming because he doesn't want to make it himself. Maybe this happened in the night, maybe this happened in the blink of an eye, but I'm assuming that there's not a small crowd waiting for this to happen. There's been movement behind this. Forever it's been the nation of Israel being saved by God, them getting angry after not being treated what they call fairly, and then pushing it back and blaming God. So it's not like you have to be a Jew to know the history of the decision-making skills that they had. But I don't think any of the Romans were really going to be the first one to step up and challenge this because, one, they probably do know the history of the God of the nation of Israel. I'm sure they do know the history of the plagues and getting out of Egypt and all these different things. And why would you step up and want to cause conflict if the Jews are willing to crucify their own king on their own volition? I mean, be like, hey, okay, whatever you say. And two, who's going to go against the city by himself? Who's going to go against an entire nation? Like I said, this is Pilate. He gets to make the decision here. Who's going to willingly stand up and say, I'm going to go against this entire nation who's violently willing to kill this man who really hasn't done anything wrong? Well, like I said, I'm not vouching for the guy, but I'm not going to want to do that. I don't understand why you would. What kind of decision would you make with an entire Chiefs stadium just chanting at you to do something that you don't want to do, or that you're afraid to do? I know I would easily make the decision to give up everything I've ever done, right? I would easily make the decision to alleviate the safety of my family and my wife and my children and my job and my position in life. It's an easy decision, right? And I know that you guys would do the same. I would easily give up everything that would probably make me lose my life for this Jew who I don't share a race with, and I don't share a religion with, I don't share a relationship with. But I don't know. I have a hard time letting go of my tithe money some weeks. So I know that's not going to be a decision that I'm probably going to make, I'll be honest with you. And that's why I asked myself, do we really think that this decision is as easy reading this now as it was 2,000 years ago with the pressure on it? I don't think that it was. He made the wrong decision, nevertheless. When you're in a position of authority, it's your job. But I don't want to be part of that. Verse 19, as we keep going, it says, "When he was set down on the judgment seat," we're talking about Pilate here, "his wife sent unto him, saying, Have thou nothing to do with that just man, for I have suffered many things this day in a dream because of him. But the chief priests and the elders persuaded the multitude that they should ask Barabbas, and destroy Jesus. The governor answered and said unto them, Whether of the twain will ye that I release unto you? They said, Barabbas. Pilate saith unto them, What shall I do then with Jesus which is called Christ? They all say unto him, Let him be crucified. And the governor said, Why? What evil hath he done? But they cried out the more, saying, Let him be crucified. They're not letting up. I mean, he's got no reprieve. We Sarah and I got home from a birthday party on Friday, and I'm trying to go inside, and this old lady is walking around the parking lot at 12 o'clock. And I'm like, what is this lady doing out here? We're walking by, and she does like the, you do the head nod, like, oh, hey, acknowledge your existence, you're a person outside at 12 o'clock, 75 years old. And she asks this leading question. There's like a cop car. There's a car there that has one of the control lights on it. It's like you bought it off of a lot or something, off auction. And she asked me, she's like, can you buy those at whatever? I'm like, I don't really know. I'm like trying to be cordial. I'm tired, whatever. This woman talks to us for 45 minutes. Literally. I'm not joking. Like, I was telling Bob and Lorinda yesterday, like, I was partially mad at myself because I couldn't get myself away from the conversation. I just wasn't bold enough to say, shut up. But she literally didn't breathe. She just kept going. She would tell us about a story about how she got into a wreck and got pushed up on the curb over here, and Uncle Beer and the cop came up and she was asking me questions. And then this one time in Wyoming, I was driving that thing. I'm like, I can't even get in there. Like, there's no chance. And I was just, oh. So, I don't know why I said that. But, yeah, anyway. So, Pilate is in a position of authority. I had a reason I was going down that rabbit hole, but I don't remember. It's not in my notes. That's why you don't get off the notes. Yeah. So Pilate, as a position of authority here, with great power comes that great responsibility. Even when you're in a tough situation, everybody wants to be the CEO, everybody wants to be the president, everybody wants to be the manager until they have to make the decision that affects the people that work underneath them, until they have to make the decision that the world depends on, or that the business, or that the lives of those people depend on. And, I'm thankful that God chose to write Pilate's story and not mine. I told you I'm going to say that a couple different times today because it's a good reminder to myself not to get too high and mighty on me while I'm pointing fingers at Pilate. But when you're at the top, you have to make the right decisions. And when you don't, you have to answer for that. And it's not always your small pond of decisions that are affected. His bad streak continues. Now, not only do we have the seemingly irrelevant governor who's denying his kingship and allowing the people to decide who they're released to, but now he's asking what they should do to him. Right? Verse 22 says, Pilate saith unto them, What shall I do then with Jesus which is called Christ? Why is he even in position here if you're just asking them what they're going to do? I'm not trying to hyper dispensationalize it. I'm not trying to jump too far into it, but if the tradition was to ask the people, at this feast, if they wanted a prisoner, who am I to whatever, if that's the case. But I don't understand why you have somebody in a position of authority if they're turning that decision making over to the people for everything. What should I do? Who should I give to? What are we doing with them? The decisions that I want to be made in our government certainly aren't always done. If it comes from an amount of peer pressure, I'm going to start applying it a lot more. You know what I mean? If that's the case, if it just comes down to starting a riot here and asking for something, then I'll do it. But it comes down to money, and I don't have any money, so I'm irrelevant. That's what I put in my notes. Anyway, how many of you have ever been stuck between that rock and a hard place? How many of you have been stuck behind the decision-making power of having something on this side that you really, really want, that your flesh just desires and that you got to have, and then on this side you've got the thing that you know that you need, that the Lord needs you to do, and that He's asked you to do. The Bible tells us that we need to examine ourselves within the context of 1 Corinthians 11 and 2 Corinthians chapter 13. It's tied to communion and the Lord's Supper and how we examine ourselves and being prepared to take that. But when we look at it inspirationally in our own lives, we should be examining ourselves every day. We should be looking into our own heart and understanding, why are we making the decisions that we're making? What is the attitude behind this? The hard attitude concept, I feel like gets worn out a little bit, and sometimes it can be overused, but it is true. Why are you doing what you're doing? We'll say it over and over forever. It's not about the what, it's about the why. And 1 Corinthians 11:28, to the end of the chapter, talks about that. It says, "But let a man examine himself, and so let him eat of that bread and drink of that cup." Like I said, it's tied to that, but inspirationally, we're examining ourselves. 2 Corinthians 13:5 says, "Examine yourselves whether you be in the faith. Prove your own selves. Know ye not your own selves how that Jesus Christ is in you, except ye reprobates." And like I said, Pilate doesn't have a relationship with the Lord. He doesn't have the ability to do this. He doesn't have the hope that lives inside of you and I as born again believers today. But as we take this parallel, we're studying this guy out, and we're looking at how we relate to him and how he shows us a lot of things that we don't want to do. How much easier as a Christian is it to allow somebody to make those decisions for you, right? He's asking the people who they want and what they're going to do with them and all these different things. It's a cop-out to me. How easy is it to say, yeah, I should be in church on Sunday mornings, but, I do have a buddy, he's a really good guy. He's got season tickets. I'm going to ask him what he thinks. I'll talk to him, and I'm sure he'll give me a good perspective. Like, what are we doing? Like, don't turn it over to that guy. You know what I mean? When you're in a position of authority, the success of whatever you are leading falls on your shoulders. Everything rises and falls on leadership. As a Christian, you don't get to sit out the decision making. Like, you don't get to be the designated hitter, if you will. Like, you get to step up and do the cool stuff, but you don't have to play defense, right? Like, you don't have to do these things. If you let the world lead your decision, where do you think it's going to lead you? Like, it's not going to lead you here on Sunday mornings. Like, the world is not going to be like, hey, you should probably go to church this morning. Hey, you should get up early. You should be there at 9 o'clock. You should be there early to help set up and volunteer to do this and do that and sing. Like, the world's not going to tell you to do that. It's going to lead you to a position of power over a feast where you're letting prisoners run free because it's a party favor. Like, that's not, you know what I mean? The Bible tells us at the feast this year, or at this feast each year, there's a prisoner that can be released. Like I said, like some party favor that anybody in 2021 would be a fan of. Like, I don't want to go to that party. I don't want to live anywhere near that party. Like, don't release prisoners around me, please. Like, I can eat and be happy without saying, yeah, just give him another chance. Like, don't do that. So we come down to, the decision the Pilate's got to make. He's got two choices. He's got Jesus Christ, self-proclaimed King of the Jews, who the Jews hate, or Barabbas, which a man that Mark chapter 15:7 says, "And there was one named Barabbas, which lay bound with them that had made an insurrection with him, who had committed murder in the insurrection." I mean, that's not a hard choice, but Barabbas is numbered with the prisoners. He made an insurrection and committed murder through those acts. And I don't know a ton about government. I don't know a ton about how the setup was back then, but insurrection, which is defined as a rising against civil or political authority, the open and active opposition of a number of persons to the execution of a law in a city or state. Barabbas was a direct threat to Pilate's power. Like, if he's in the insurrection, something's happening here. Like, he's trying to do something directly against Pilate. Instead of Pilate standing by the fact that he sees nothing wrong with Jesus, instead of the fact that he sees his wife come to him and say, hey, dude, don't have anything to do with this guy, this just man. I am suffering in my dreams because of this guy. And don't pay any attention to the fact that he's a governor and the law says you can't convict people without proof. I mean, like I said, I don't think this is a terribly hard decision that he has to make. And you can understand that. Like I said, when we read this, it's a little bit easier to take this black and white. Well, he's the good guy, this is the bad guy. But even when all signs point to the right direction, to the right decision, it's not easy. It's not always easy. I'd venture to say most of the time it's probably harder, especially given the world that we live in now. The good decision, the right decision, is not easy to make most of the time. Pilate's willing to offer up the man who committed a direct act of rebellion to his government, and with murder through insurrection, I don't know if this is completely true, but I would think if it's against that government, he committed murder. Maybe he killed Pilate's one of his men. I mean, maybe because of this act, he killed one of Pilate's own guys. And maybe I'm stretching it, but goodness gracious, I was thinking in this case, Pilate is seemingly shooting himself in his own foot, and I was thinking in my own life, these people that I know that are constantly surrounded by conflict. They're constantly in bad shape with their employers, or they're constantly in bad shape with their family or their friends, or they're always walking around with a cast or something. Like, I think we all know somebody like that. And you're like, have you ever tried making different decisions? Like, have you ever thought maybe it's you and not the entire world around you? Like, I feel like we all know somebody like that. Don't look at me, because I feel like I know I can fit the bill of that person, but it's not me. Okay, I'm not that person in your life. But, that's what I see with Pilate here. It's like, have you thought maybe to try something different? It's obviously not working here. But, the one thing that changes every playing field in every man and woman's life is fear. Right? Fear is the ultimate equalizer in really everybody's life, I would think. Fear is a stronghold in the life of a Christian that can and often is the driving force behind making bad decisions. And Pilate here had every right to fear the situation. I'm not saying that he didn't. Like, he's perfectly justified in being fearful here. I'd have been scared, I'll be honest with you there. But I'm pretty sure there's been other people in the history of time, throughout the history of the Bible, that have faced adversity and faced fear in the face and made better decisions with worse circumstances. I'll just throw that out there. Men and women that felt fear in the face of making the right decision over making the comfortable decision. They had the wants and the comfortability and the stability here, and they had the, I need to do this here. I have to do this for the Lord. This is for the glory and honor of the King. Think about Moses. Moses is fascinating to me. This guy, he's asked to go talk to Pharaoh. He's got the speech problem. At this time, he's walking into the most powerful person to say, hey, I'm going to need you to let your entire workforce go. Thanks. I don't want to do that. I don't even want to go into my boss's office and say, hey, you're not paying me what you told me you were going to pay me 7 months ago. So, he could have walked in there and got smoked. Honestly, the Pharaoh could have been like, excuse me, like, next. You know what I mean? How do you think Abraham felt when he's walking up the mountain with Isaac, knowing that he's not coming down with them? With Daniel, when he's the decree comes out that the prayer is directed to King Darius, he's not changing. He doesn't care. What about when he's facing the lions? Thank God Christ was able to stare fear in the face when he prayed in the garden, right? When we bestowed the fear upon him, he took the sin for us, and he was able to conquer the fear and say, I'm going to make this decision that has to be made over the comfortability and saying, no thanks. And maybe it's not fair for Pilate to have to be in this predicament, but this is the defining moment in his could have been status. Pilate could have been so much better. Pilate could have been casting crowns back at the feet of the Lord, on that glorious day, but he didn't. He's not going to. John chapter 19 tells me that Pilate was fearful. We know that. Verses 7, 8, and 9 says, the Jews answered him, we have a law, and by our law he ought to die, because, I'm not laughing at the scripture, I'm laughing at the train. Because by our law he ought to die, because he made himself the Son of God. When Pilate therefore heard that saying, he was the more afraid. He went again into the judgment hall, and saith unto Jesus, oh, Adeline was right. The train's going this way. I said it was going to be that way. One more. All right. Went again into the judgment hall and saith unto Jesus, whence art thou? But Jesus gave him no answer. So Pilate, I'm going to read that again. Sorry, that was... Okay, so John chapter 19, 7, 8, 9. The Jews answered him, we have a law, and by our law he ought to die, because he made himself the Son of God. When Pilate therefore heard that saying, he was the more afraid. He's scared. And went again into the judgment hall and saith unto Jesus, whence art thou? But Jesus gave him no answer. I think that's classic. Pilate's hard pressed here. He knows he's making the wrong decisions probably. He goes in and he's trying to have Jesus fix it up for him and make the right decision. And Jesus is just staring him in the face like, I ain't helping you. He already asked him the same question. He's trying to get Jesus to make the decision for him. Right? He's trying to go in and say, okay, I got a problem here. You're my problem here. I'm stuck in the middle. This isn't fair to me. Why is this my life? Why did I draw this stick today? But Jesus doesn't give him the answer, and he'll give the same answer or the lack thereof to us in the same predicament. When we try to hard press Jesus and cram him into a decision that we're not willing to make or that we're not strong enough or educated to make, I don't feel like he's going to answer us. He doesn't have to. He already held up his end of the deal. The Lord's not a crutch for us to use when it's decision-making time, when it's convenient for us to say, I don't really know. I know if this goes south, then I can just blame Jesus, and it's all good, and I'll save myself. But it's hard to blame him for going back in there. I mean, fight or flight. It's like he knows that this is the guy that can probably answer the questions that he has and gets him out of the situation that he's in. But at the end of the day, you just can't do that. And then the next verse is where we see his next decision come in. Verse 24, it says, when Pilate saw that he could prevail nothing, but that rather a tumult was made, he took water and washed his hands before the multitude, saying, I am innocent of the blood of this just person. See ye to it. Well, wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't that be nice if we could just say, all right, not me, it's on you. And here's where I kind of flip the script on Pilate. I feel like I've kind of vouched for the fact that he's in a sticky situation that maybe he wasn't prepared for, essentially, as a Roman. But this is just weak to me. He has no allegiance to the Jews. He has no allegiance to the Lord or a relationship, but he is a governor. He does have an allegiance in a relationship with the law and rightful justice. He does have an allegiance to doing things the right way by his job. And he has a job to uphold that. He has a responsibility to uphold the law and the sanctity of what that does and why it institutes control in the society. And, Christians nowadays can be really great. I'm sure Pilate was, I don't know how Pilate was. I'm not going to say that. But, what happens in a good Christian's life when his or her Christianity impedes their comfortability? And that's what I'm getting at here. What happens when the rubber meets the road in a good guy's life or a good girl's life when you've got to give up that person, or when you've got to give up that bottle, when you've got to give up whatever it may be, when your comfortability is challenged by what the Lord is asking you to do. When God asks you to make decisions in your life, when you become so uncomfortable that you have to spiritually move closer to him or be willing to move to the outer parts, of the camp. And like I said, you can say that Pilate drew the short end of the stick here, maybe. Or you can look at the other side of it and say that he drew the golden stick of the bunch in the form of being able to actually do something for the Lord. We talk about being up here. We talk about going back into the longest train I've ever heard. Jeez. The opportunity to actually give something back to the Lord. We thank him for his salvation. We thank him for this church. We thank him for all the things that we do in our life. Do we not only thank him for the opportunity to give back, but do we ask for it? Do we ask for the opportunity to actually make decisions that are going to bring glory back to him and do something for him? And Pilate had the golden opportunity here. There's no telling what would have happened to him. I'm sure he would have got killed. I'm sure it probably would have been violent. I don't know what it would have been. But when we look at this from a spiritual, mature standpoint and read verses like Romans 8:18, it says, for I reckon that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us. I do know of 2 Corinthians 4:8-9, 2 Corinthians 4:8-9, it says, we are troubled on every side, yet not distressed. We are perplexed, but not in despair. Persecuted, but not forsaken. Cast down, but not destroyed. 15-18 says, for all things are for your sakes, that the abundant grace might through the thanksgiving of many redound to the glory of God, for which cause we faint not. But though our outward man perish, yet the inward man is renewed day by day. For our light affliction, which is but for a moment, worketh for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory, while we look not at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal. We go through some tough times. Pilate, like I said, he's in a tough situation here, but the Bible tells us that our sufferings here, they can't even compare to the glory that's waiting for us. They cannot even compare to what the Lord has to offer those that are willing to offer themselves back to them. It's not a dig at him, but it takes spiritual maturity to get to that point in your life. I don't think that you're going to be able to just walk off the street, go into church once and say, I'm going to give up everything for the Lord. Maybe you do. Maybe you shouldn't, honestly. It takes spiritual discernment and time and experience, and it takes the local New Testament church. That's why we have this, to offer the accountability that we need as believers to be able to make these decisions, because they are hard. They are hard. push us into a place that we're not built to be comfortable, and that's okay. That's where we're supposed to be. Christians make mistakes, and that's okay, but that's why we need to be here. That's why Christ instituted this. That's why we're here. Somebody to say, hey, this is right. Somebody to say, hey, this is wrong. Somebody to say, hey, you're in a tough situation because of the decisions that you're making. Or maybe it's like Job. You're in a tough situation because God's trying to work something for you. Not because you're doing something wrong. Just because you're going through a tough time in life doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing something wrong. We looked at that this last couple of weeks with Job. But there is something to be had out of it. There is a decision to be made that's going to bring good circumstances or bad circumstances. Bad circumstances. But so often, you don't have the support of the church. People don't have spiritual discernment or maturity or relationship with the Lord. So they're like Pilate. Pilate makes a decision that protects him in the most immediate sense in the way that he sees best to fit his needs. And, I understand that to a certain point. But the logic behind it, and as we get into kind of towards the end of this, the garbage statement of just saying, I wash my hands of the sea to it, like, what? It's not even a thing. Like, how about as a father or a brother or something, like you tell your kids or you tell your family members, like, hey, you shouldn't do drugs, you shouldn't drink, you shouldn't do these things. And you're driving them to the house where there's a party where there's going to be drugs and there's going to be alcohol. And as they're getting out, you say, hey, I told you better. So if anything happens, it's on you. Like, they're going to say exactly what the Jews did. They're going to say, all right, thanks, man. Thanks for the ride. You're right. It's on us. We'll see you later. Like, what do you expect? Matthew 27:25 says, then answered all the people and said, his blood be on us and our children. Gosh, that is a scary verse. Like, this may be something that the Jews said, but it's because of Pilate's decision. Like, they're only in that predicament because of what Pilate allowed them to do. And they're going to answer for that. They're going to stand in front of the Lord one day, and they're going to answer for that. But Pilate's going to answer for that too, because he allowed them to do that as the leader of that. And then the last decision here that he makes to seal the deal, he actually goes through with it. He delivers Jesus over. Verse 26, then released he Barabbas unto them, and when he had scourged Jesus, he delivered him to be crucified. Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the common hall and gathered unto him the whole band of soldiers, and they stripped him and put on a scarlet robe. As a Christian, you don't have to physically do the sin to be affiliated with it. Like, you don't have to be the one that actually carries out the punishment or the sin. Like, you're absolutely affiliated with it in the decision-making process, and you're not getting away from it. I'm not getting away from it. As sad as it is for me to know that Pilate knew that Jesus was innocent and just, we do the very same thing. It's been really convicting for me lately to talk about the shoe tying routine. That's been me, the stretching back in the chair and rubbing my eyes at work like I'm just ready to eat, Oh man, I'm so hungry, and I'm praying and I'm done. Like, I've done that. I'm not even gonna lie, like, that's been me. And we do the same thing. We deliver Jesus over to the common hall, we scourge Jesus, we do that when we make those kinds of decisions. And when we say what preaches the Bible and we do what preaches the world, we're just dragging it through the mud. We really are. When we say that we love the Lord and do the direct opposite with our hands and our feet, we're basically just turning him over and saying, well, I wash my hands, I'm saved, I'm good, we're good, we're not good, but I'm good. I prayed. I prayed. And the world's standing around saying, thanks, man, got it, we'll take care of it from here. It never has been enough, but it definitely isn't in 2021 to just say the right thing. Nobody cares what you say anymore. Like, they really don't. You can hear whatever you want, just turn on the TV. But why do we call ourselves Christians and not do what he says? And this gets a little bit away from Pilate because he's obviously not a Christian here. But if we're looking at the decisions that we make, Luke 6:46-49 says, and why call ye me Lord, Lord, and do not the things which I say? Whosoever cometh to me and heareth my sayings and doeth them, I will show you to whom he is like. He is like a man which built an house and digged deep and laid the foundation on a rock. And when the flood arose, the stream beat vehemently upon that house and could not shake it, for it was founded upon a rock. But he that heareth and doeth not is like a man that without a foundation built an house upon the earth, against which the stream did beat vehemently, and immediately it fell, and the ruin of that house was great. Pilate says that he knows Jesus is innocent multiple times. He says it in all 4 books. Each one of the Gospels, he says it. It says in Matthew and Mark both, I believe, that he says that he knows that he was only delivered because of the envy of the Jews. He's not innocent of ignorance here. But it's just not enough at the end of the day to sit idle. It's not enough for him to sit back and say, I know that you're innocent, Jesus. I know that this is the case. I know you didn't do anything, but I have to do this. Jesus, I know that you died for my sins. I know that you did this for me, but I gotta act cool at work, because if I'm not cool at work and I don't have friends, then how can I invite them to church? How are they ever gonna play volleyball? You know what I mean? And it's just not enough, you know? There's, like I said at the beginning, there's a lot of could-have-beens in the Bible. We look at, in Acts chapter 26, Paul details, you know, his basically his life and conversion to King Agrippa. And where's it? Acts 26, 27 through 8. Paul speaking first here, he goes through and he gives him what he needs to hear. He says, King Agrippa, believest thou the prophets? I know that thou believest. He gives him everything that he needs. Then Agrippa said unto Paul, almost thou persuadest me to be a Christian. Almost. Pilate almost made a good decision. King Agrippa almost made a good decision. You know, some of the bigger stories, like Jonah. Jonah leaves off his story. Jonah, I think, is one of the most influential could have been. I mean, the guy, you leave off his story, he did all these good things, and he's pouting over a gourd that God brought up in the night. Like, the could have beens are very close to us. They're not the Pilates. They're not the Barabbases. They're not the Antichrists. You know, I mean, they're the Jonahs. They're the Pauls. They're the put your name in there. Put my name in there. You know, and God can and will do amazing things in the life of people around you and yourself if we allow Him to. The Bible, like I said, Bible could have been status is not reserved for the phallus of the foul. It's pretty close to home, actually. And the last verse I had here is just Ezekiel 22:30. It says, and I sought for a man among them that should make up the hedge, to stand in the gap before me for the land, that I should not destroy it. But I found none. Pilate is unfortunately a fairly prime example of where we stand in Christianity today, and where we can maybe find ourselves. You know, if he could have stood up and stood in that gap, we'd be reading a lot different story. You know, eventually something would have had to die for our salvation. So I'm not going to be too angry with the fact that he had to be the scapegoat. I think Jesus was the ultimate scapegoat, obviously. But I was looking for somebody to stand in the gap and to make up the hedge. And Pilate was just a good way to look in my own life and see that I've gotten my own needs. So that's all I got. Let's pray. Dear God, thank you for this lesson. Thank you for helping me to get it out. Lord, I pray that it was a blessing to them that are here, anybody that's watching online. Thank you for this church, Lord. I pray that you be with Bob, give him the word to say. Love you. Thank you for your son and his sacrifice. In Jesus' name.